Hello, everybody. So, yes, I'm Bill Drake, and this is the closing plenary, and we're starting early? That sounds good. It's very unusual. Well, thank you, Joran, for your comments. It's very interesting. In the tradition of last year, where we finished EuroDIG by talking about internet fragmentation, this time we're going to do something equally simple and talk about international trade agreements. I'm sure that all of you know that international trade is a very simple area to work in. It sort of makes ICANN look easy. See if I can put my glasses on without disturbing this thing. So the rules for international trade that are established under the World Trade Organization were created before the internet took off. And so that has raised a lot of issues for parties who have wanted to try to revise international trade arrangements to make them much more specific and related to the internet. And there's a great deal going on right now in that direction. There's a real push happening, and in fact, I would argue that international trade, like security, is probably one of the big drivers in the next few years of global internet governance. The World Trade Organization's agreements do have now binding international disciplines that are treaty disciplines, subject to compliance mechanisms, dispute resolution, so on, that apply to the internet. And there have been years of work to try to make them more specific and focused and relevant to the internet environment. But because a lot of that has not gone very well in terms of the bargaining dynamics in the World Trade Organization, much of the energy has gone into so-called preferential trade agreements, that's to say smaller group agreements, such as the famous Trans-Pacific Partnership, which you've all come to know and love so much, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement between the EU and Canada, both of which have very detailed language about digital trade issues. And now there are pending agreements, the Trade and Services Agreement, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the Regional Cooperation Economic Partnership in Asia, the redrafting of the North American Free Trade Agreement, all of which include, to varying degrees, fairly detailed language about digital trade issues. It's touched on issues such as data localization and cross-border data flows, privacy and data protection, intermediary liability, intellectual property, net neutrality, encryption, access to source code, you name it. There have been a lot of different provisions proposed in these different discussions. 2 weeks ago, the European Commission tabled a proposal on enabling environments to facilitate online transactions that gets into consumer protection, spam, and electronic authentication, all in the context of international trade agreements. And they propose that the WTO take these up. Developing countries are not so excited about that. All of which raises some questions. Procedurally, there's a question as to whether or not trade processes are transparent enough, inclusive enough, participatory enough from the standpoint of people who've worked in the multi-stakeholder internet governance environment to have the kind of authority and legitimacy that one would want from global governance arrangements. There's also substantive questions. Which issues should be dealt with under an international trade framework? Which issues perhaps would you not want included under an international trade framework? And what role in particular has Europe played? Have European actors been influencing these developments? What policies should Europe be advocating? So these are all things we want to get into over the course of the next hour. And to do so, we have an excellent panel of speakers that will go through essentially 4 parts. First, we'll start with a little discussion about current European Commission work, particularly with regard, I believe, to cross-border data flow. Speaking for us will be Pierce O'Donoghue, who's the Acting Director for Future Networks and DG Connect in the European Commission. And I understand you have to run to a flight fairly quickly, so we'll do you. Then we'll have Marilia Maciel here from the Diplo Foundation. She's a senior researcher there, and she'll give an overview of some of the issues that are on the table in current trade discussions. And then we'll have a little discussion about how these developments are viewed from the standpoint of different European stakeholders. We have Robert Kropelski, Kroplewski from the Polish government. Where are you, Robert? Is he here? Ah, okay. Good to meet you. Erica Mann from Covington and Burlington, former member of the board of directors of ICANN. Konstantinos Komatais from the Internet Society, and Herr Dr. Professor Wolfgang Klein-Victor, formerly of the University of Aarhus. We will then go to open discussion with the audience for about 20-25 minutes, including people who are remote participants. And then we will wrap up and hand back to Sandra to do the closing ceremonies and so on. So that's our agenda. Let's start with Pierce then, if you could come forward, and Pierce O'Donoghue from the European Commission.